Welcome back to Weems Motor Co. It's time to finally figure out why this thing keeps breaking push rods. Stick around. So as of the recording of this video, it has been 2 years since this motorcycle has been on the channel. April of 2023, we took this 1956 Triumph desert sled out to the Biltwell 100 and ripped across the Mojave Desert for a whopping good time. Well, in that video, you notice we had a few issues. The gas tank decided to waddle itself loose. We were breaking push rods, having a lot of issues with this motorcycle. I think at last count, I've broken, 6 push rods in this bike, and currently it has a broken push rod in it. Never could figure it out, didn't have the time to figure it out before we got out to the race. So now is the time to figure out why this thing is breaking so many push rods. So if you remember the story on this bike, I did not build this engine. I bought this engine from a friend of mine. He said it was rebuilt, and I took a flashlight, shined it down in the spark plug hole. Did notice that it had new pistons, so I figured at least it has a top end rebuild. Well, throwed it in the bike, and we started having that issue of breaking push rods. Not sure exactly why, but that's what we're going to do today. We're going to figure out why this thing is having so many issues of breaking push rods. Hopefully I can get this thing going, because I do have a friend here in Tampa who races motocross, and he's been asking me, hey, let's go ride, you can borrow one of my bikes. And I'm like, I have a bike, I just need to fix that bike. So hopefully we can figure out what the issue is. We're gonna get this gas tank off of here, and probably have to address why this thing vibrated all the mounts out, but get that addressed. We've already drained the gas out, and then we can get to the engine. And the first thing I want to do is to pull these rocker boxes off of there and inspect the rockers to see if possibly something in there is causing a bind, which would cause it to break the push rod. So let's get the gas tank off, get down to the top of this motor so that we can start getting these rocker boxes off. Let's get to work. So typically you would see 2 of those push rods sticking up out of there. Well, we know that we broke a push rod. Just so happened to be it was the exhaust primary side push rod that broke last time. So I broke the timing side, I broke that. I don't recall ever breaking one on the intake side, but we're still gonna pull that rocker box off to look inside there. But we can pull this one push rod out because I can get to it. Now the other one, it's broken in half down in that tube. So we're gonna have to use our little claw, sink it down in there, see if we can grab a hold of those 2 pieces of push rod and pull them out. And then we can continue working our way to the back. Let's get these things out of here. So this is my collection of push rods that I've popped. So it's been 5 that we've snapped in our bike that's called the push rod popper. Now that we have all these pulled out, we can get that other rocker box off of there and just kind of have a look and start figuring out what's going on exactly. So let's get back to it. All right, took a quick moment and went and checked the manual to look at these rocker boxes. There's a few questionable things because a lot of parts are interchangeable when it comes to these old Triumphs. But one thing I do know is that that is a 9-bolt head, which means it's a 650cc. It is a later model because it has dowels on the head. However, these rocker boxes they had my head scratching. Number one, they have 6 bolts for the rocker box caps, and everything that I've known is that the 6-bolt rocker box caps came out on the 750cc's. So now with the 750cc rocker box caps, the question was, will they work on a 650 head? So I reached out to my buddy AJ Richter. You know his YouTube channel. He is the machinist that I use for all my machine work, the heads, the cylinders, all that stuff. He is a pretty good expert when it comes to these engines, and we talked about, well, will a 750 rocker box work on a 650 head? And he's like, well, I've never heard that it not. And guys mix and match these things all the time, so I was like, well, maybe there's something wrong with the actual rockers themselves. So I inspected them, made sure that they were assembled properly, where they have these springs, and some people get the springs and the shims mixed up. Everything is right and tight on this. So me and AJ were like scratching our heads, well, what could it be? Everything seems smooth. I'm able to reach down in the pushrod tubes with my filler and pull them, and they're nice and smooth. And he's like, well, have you checked the cam timing? And I'm like, that's the one thing I haven't done, to make sure that somebody didn't do something wonky with the cam timing. So I think that's the next point in this. We're going to pull that timing cover off and get a look at those timing gears on the cams and just see, possibly, maybe they have something wrong inside there. So let's get that cover off. Well, we might have to say AJ was possibly right. So these are the early cam gears that only have one keyway in them, which means that the indexing should be directly across from that keyway. Well, on this exhaust cam, somebody has stamped the outside diameter, which means that would be 180 out, which means that might be our issue. Should I retime these cams properly, put it all together, throw some push rods in there and try it? Or should I go deeper? Leave a comment down below what I should do while I go grab something to drink. We'll figure it out. All right, here we are the next day, and I went ahead and gathered up all of the gaskets and everything to do what needs to be done on our desert sled. Now, I did sleep on it and think about the process of, hey, I could slap this thing back together, throw a set of push rods in there and see what happens. But I was thinking about my good friend Seth Neefus up in Oregon, and him and his brother have a shop called Red Clouds Collective, and they sell all kinds of cool clothing brand stuff. They have knives, shop rags, all kinds of accessories and merchandise. But he is also a Born Free builder this year, and I consider him a friend. They have this saying that came from their dad, and it says, any job, no matter how big or small, do it right or not at all. And that was ringing in my head as I was thinking about our desert sled. I could just slap this back together and that would be the easy way to do things, but is it the right way? We do not know what's going on as far as, has this thing been bored? What compression ratio pistons are in it? What kind of cams? Have the tappets been modified in any way? Any of these things could be a factor that goes into why this thing's doing it. Now, I have to pull the carburetors off anyway to clean those, so I said, you know what? To do this the right way, just like Seth's dad says, we need to do it all the way. That means I have to get all the way down below the cylinder and look inside those cases and possibly identify what kind of cams are in this. I'm pretty sure they're not stock because this thing runs a little bit hotter than a normal engine. Plus, these cam gears seem way too clean and way too new for a stock cam. Now, these cams also have additional marks all around them, which could cause the issue for cam timing and things like that. So we don't know what these cams are. That's what we're going to find out. So we're going to have to pull the exhaust. We're going to have to pull the carburetors. We're going to have to pull the head, pull the cylinders, get underneath there, and figure out what's going on. So let's get back to work. Alright, so right off the bat, we can tell that this has been bored 20 over stock. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means we got a little bit bigger bore, which means that changes the engine displacement. A lot of math in that. Let's have a seat really quick and we'll talk you through that. So, engine displacement. To find out how many cc's or cubic inches your engine is, there is a formula that figures out the volume. That means the area inside of the cylinder. And you got to do that by 2 because we have 2 cylinders here. Well, the formula can be a little bit crazy, so I went ahead and wrote it down here for you guys, and I can explain it as we go. So volume equals the number of cylinders that you have times the stroke depth. That means how far that piston moves up and down during the stroke. Then you multiply that by 3.14, which is pi, multiplied by the bore diameter. That's the circumference of that piston squared. That means multiply it by itself. Then take that and then you divide that by 4, and that gives you your volume. Now, if you don't want to go through all of the math, do the algebraic equation, you can literally just jump on your computer, go to Google and say, hey, cc calculator or cubic inch calculator, and you just punch in those numbers. Now, we know that this has been bored 20 over, 20 thousandths larger than what the standard bore is, which means that bore, I have not measured it yet, but it should measure out to about 2.815. Now, 2.815 factored into that equation, that should make the cc's of this engine a 658.8, round that up, a 659 cc, which is cool. But something I did notice is the tops of these pistons seem a little bit higher than what stock would be, which means they would be a higher compression ratio piston. I'm assuming those are probably 9.5 to 1, possibly a 10.5 to 1. And the only way to do that is to be able to measure from the piston guide pin, from the center of that to the top of the piston. Now that distance will tell us what the compression ratio is of that, and the way that we get to that is we have to remove the cylinder so that we can get that measurement. Once we remove the cylinder, we can see, hey, does this have stock rods in it or custom rods? And hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be able to see those cams down there, and I could throw a dial indicator to figure out what kind of lift and duration that's going on with those cams, and maybe that will answer our question why this thing keeps breaking push rods. So let's get all these nuts off the bottom of this cylinder base, lift it up, and see what's going on. All right, got that cylinder off and we're able to look in there and kind of examine what's going on. Well, we were just able to measure those pistons, and we did discover that those are a 9-to-1 compression piston, which would be stock for that 1972 late head setup and cylinder and all that stuff. So good to know that we're within stock specs, so that means we shouldn't have to do anything pretty crazy as far as the piston's concerned. Now, we were able to look down inside of that cylinder and identify the stampings and the cast marks on the cams, and this happens to have the E3325 cam setup, which means there's a lift of 0.296, a duration of 255 degrees, and then the lobe center carries for 100.5 degrees. Stock cams, both front and back, nothing spectacular there. This was an upgrade, this being a T110 Tiger for 1956. By that time, they had said, hey, our exhaust cams are pretty awesome, and a lot of guys are doing a hot rod thing by putting an exhaust cam in the intake side. By that time, 1956, they said, all right, we're going to make this standard for the performance models, and that's what this bike has. All that being said, all the nerdy stuff aside, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong when it comes to the cams, the lift, nothing outside of the normal. Everything looks good down there. So I think the next thing to do is to go ahead and look at our lifters, look at our lifter blocks, make sure everything is good to go on them. So let's give those a look over and maybe possibly find the issue. Let's check them out. I think I found the culprit. Now, we were breaking a lot of the push rods on the exhaust side of the cylinder, on the timing side of the engine. So looking at the tappets, didn't notice anything there. I mean, basic, just a little bit of wear, but nothing that would cause this issue to happen. So I removed the tappets out of the tappet block and noticed there is a significant wear on that exhaust side, on the timing side. Check this out. A little hard to see. Let's add some light on the subject. Yeah, you see that line? That's not supposed to be there. It looked like the tappet has just worn out that side of the tappet block. I think I have an extra one of these tappet blocks, but yeah, we need to get that out of there because that's no bueno. That's possibly what's causing the issue. So let's see if we can find a tappet block. All right, we were able to dig out some tappet blocks, but something very important to note here is that there are many different types of tappet blocks, whether 500cc or 600cc, and throughout the years they did many different things by changing the thickness of that base, adding O-rings, all kinds of changes throughout it. I have a really good friend down in Australia, Paul Himshaw. He has collected up all of the data and the information for this because he is making these super sweet custom pushrod tubes for Triumph engines. Now, he was able to help me out with some of the information. I did know that, in fact, that these are 1972 and the cylinder is 1972 based on the part numbers and everything. So with that all being said, if your engine is mixed and matched, just kind of do the research. Reach out to Paul. He's able to help you out. You can find him on Instagram at Award Cycle, and he can get you hooked up with the right parts for your engine if you are tackling things like we are. But it just so happened as I was digging through some of my parts bin that I have a brand new one replacement part so that we can get this thrown back together. So what we need to do is to drive out the old one. We're going to go ahead and take both of them out. That way we can check those O-rings. Go ahead and replace those so we can know we got good seals, and we can clean that gasket surface off. So let's get this thing taken apart, get it cleaned up so that we can get it back onto the bike and get this motorcycle back onto the dirt. Stick around. cylinder all cleaned up. All the gasket surfaces are nice and neat. Just wanted to clarify, I'm not using a sanding disc to clean these up. This is a bristle disc that is very light usage, little rubber fingers that knock off those pieces of the gasket that are left over and cleans those surfaces good. They make these in different grits and different strengths. Be really careful if you're using these on aluminum, especially if you have the wrong grit. It could actually groove the aluminum, so you just want to use these very lightly. But it cleans this steel surface up amazingly. Now, while we're sitting here, I just wanted to point out, we're talking about so many differences in these tappet blocks. Well, there's differences between intakes and exhaust tappet blocks also. Case in point, you can see that this one has an extra ring around the top compared to this one only having a ring at the bottom. Now, that ring at the bottom is where the rubber seal goes. Now, it's just a rubber O-ring that goes around there, proper fit for the right one. Let's just say that whoever put this engine together before did not use the rubber O-ring. They just filled it with silicone, which is not the right way to do things, but we're gonna make sure we do it right. But this one in particular has an extra ring around it, and you're gonna see that there is a tiny hole right there that is for oiling on the exhaust tappet. So I wanna make sure we got oil going where it is. Just case in point, know what you're working with, people, and if you have any questions, reach out to Paul. He'll get you squared away. Got it all cleaned up. We went ahead and cleaned up the base surface on the engine, ready to get into reassembly. So let's make that happen. Here we are the next morning, and we are getting ready to set up the ignition on this. Now, you've seen us do this before on Jack's new pre-unit chopper that he has, but a little bit different process in this. I didn't want to remove the primary cover and all of that stuff. With this one, I already had access to the timing side, so I just made a tool that screws onto the end of that crankshaft, and we can set our degree wheel on there. Now, went ahead and put a dial indicator on top so that we know exactly where top dead center is on this bike. When the head's on there, it's a little bit more worked in. You could see it on that other video with Jack's pre-unit chopper. But the main thing we want to do is to make sure that we get it up on top dead center and that it's on the compression stroke and yada yada yada. Then we rotate the engine back to 38 degrees before top dead center, and then we can place in our magneto drive gear, and we know that our ignition is set exactly where it needs to do to get this bike running. So with that, let's get back to work. All right, now that we have that gear tightened down, an easy way to check to make sure that you are good is to rotate the engine back so that the piston is below the optimum firing point, 38 degrees before top dead center, and slowly rotate that engine up, and your little buzz box should go beep as soon as you get to that 38 degrees before top dead center, letting you know that that's optimum firing point. So let's give that a try and see if we have got this gear nailed right into the right place. Let's do it. So that's what you call perfect timing. We are good to go to get the cover back on, but before we do that, we got to clean the oil pump, get all of everything back assembled. I did take time last night cleaning all the gasket surfaces and everything to make this a little bit faster process. So let me get everything back together and we can get this top end buttoned up. only a couple things left to do on the bike. Did take some time to go ahead and rebuild those AMO concentric 930 carburetors, so we don't have to worry about that. So next thing to do, get the air box back on there. And then we have to address the gas tank. If you remember when we were out in California, this happened.
He's alive! Look at the tank!
It's still there.
Yeah, look at it.
Ah!
So yeah, that's right. The gas tank mounts fell out of this thing halfway through the Mojave Desert, and that gas tank was rattling around. Not a good condition for racing. You know, sparks could happen and gas catch on fire, so not good. So we're going to go ahead and weld those mounts into the bottom of that gas tank so it's nice and structurally safe, and we can not have to worry about that next time. So we get that gas tank on there, run some fuel lines, get it hooked up, and then we could see if we could fire up the desert sled, and fingers crossed that we can change the name from Pushrod Popper. So maybe you guys can help us figure out a new name for this motorcycle if that's the case. So if you have some ideas for the name of this 1956 Triumph Desert Sled, jump down in the comments really quick. Leave it for us while we get some fuel lines on there and we get this air box on. Alright, so we got the fuel lines on and we got the air box on. So the last thing to do is to get this tank ready to go. So we talked about how this thing was rattling apart. Well, essentially, you have these little studs that are threaded into the bottom of the gas tank, where then you have some rubber grommets that isolate the shock and movement, and then some washers and a nut in the bottom that holds all of that up, holds that tank affixed to the frame. Well, these little threaded portions on the bottom of this tank, due to vibration, due to age, whatever, have basically taken the threads away on the bottom of the tank. So we're going to put these studs up in there and we're going to weld it to the base of the tank. Now, I've had this tank off the bike, drained, sitting outside for probably a little over a week. Shouldn't have any issues with flame or anything like that, so I'm not worried about welding on this gas tank. If you are welding on a gas tank, make sure that you have drained it. It's aerated, there is no fuel in it, not in any of the crevices or anything like that. So we've done all of that work ahead of time before we do this. One thing I am going to do on the other end where that nut goes, I'm going to drill a small hole there so I can put a circlip through, so that way the nut doesn't vibrate off of the base of it and we have no worries or no issues going forward when we go to race this bike. So let's get this going. Too easy, just a few tack welds on each one of those studs. Everything's welded up nice and tight. Now it's time to get it over on the bike. Let's get it done. So we're all fueled up, everything right and tight, buttoned up, and one last thing to do is to see if she'll fire up and if it'll break a push rod or not. So I was just thinking, the last time that this motorcycle ran was when we were out in California ripping through the Mojave Desert, and my mom was with me. So I said, let's bring Mom to the shop to see if the motorcycle will run again. What do you think, Mom?
I think it'll run again. I think.
You think? I think it'll run again too. So Let's see if we can get this thing fired up. Let's kick it. Here we go. I say that's pretty good. She likes to rev, and she likes to rev hard, so just take it for a ride.
All right, here we go. To say that I'm not nervous would be a lie. I've broken so many push rods in this thing, and it is kind of heartbreaking to know that I might break another one. But then again, I might not break one, so let's ride this thing around. I'm not going to push it too hard until I feel confident enough in it. So maybe, fingers crossed, she's good now. So then we'll get this thing back to the shop and we'll talk about another issue that I fixed on this bike. But let's fire it up, see what happens. Oh man. There we go. Fingers crossed. Second gear, no issue so far. I don't want to get too far away from the house. I don't want to push this thing back. Oh God. I really hope this thing is good. Alright, do third gear. Oh, this is a fun riding bike. Just nervous because I don't want to break anything. There it went, folks. There she went. Dang it. Well, she lives up to her name. Pushrod Popper. God, what could it be? I went through everything. God. This sucks. Well, it's time for the long push home. Dang it. It was running so good. What could it be? I tried, looked at everything. Except rocker boxes. I did not pull the rocker box shaft out. Possibly maybe one of the rocker shafts is worn out, or one of the rockers is worn or messed up. I hate to end a video like this, but there's other things that has to be done on this motorcycle, and there's other projects going on. So I think I'm just gonna wrap it up right here, guys, with a failure. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you're new around here, jump down, hit that subscribe button. If you really like the video, hit that thumbs up, turn those notifications on, and let everyone know what's going wrong here at Weems Motor Co. Peace.